Hello there guys, it's me, Unstable Voltage, and welcome back to Feed the Beast Horizons. Now since the last video, I've actually updated the mod pack version. Apparently, up until now, I have been running on Horizons version 1.0.10, and recently when I tried to log in, it said an update was available, and the recommended version is now 1.0.13. Now I had tried to update to this version previously by doing it manually, and every time I tried, whenever I logged back in, all of my Rotarycraft steam engines would immediately explode and leave a big hole in the ground. Not wanting to be bothered to deal with that, I always rolled back to the version I was using before. But I figured, as it was actually recommending an update, that I should do it anyway, and the same thing happened. Now, as it happens, I always back up my save game file, my world file, before I do such a thing. But that doesn't help either, because once you log back in and your steam engines explode, if you then put your save game or your world folder back and restore it, as soon as you log back in again, your steam engines explode. Now, I'm sure this is just something to do with the way that the mod pack is updating. Probably some sort of check is made on the engines to see what their current temperature is. And for some reason, it instantly recognises them as being overheated and they all explode. Every single one of them. Obviously, all of my steam engines are running on lava. If you've just got them running over fire, where they don't actually require the cooling fin, then they probably don't explode, but for whatever reason, it was making all of my steam engines explode. So my recommendation for any of you that are going to be updating your mod pack, first thing you should do is make a backup copy of your world folder. You should always do that anyway. Second thing you might want to do is just log in before you make the updates and just use a pick, break all of your steam engines, and then update, reload, and then put your steam engines back down, and that should be absolutely fine. Now, the major thing that I wanted to have a look at today was one more thing in the Rotarycraft mod, which was the woodcutter. Now, I actually made this a few episodes ago, but never managed to put it down because I couldn't come up with a power solution that would provide it with the energy that was needed. So what we're actually going to look at here is, now, one thing that I have noticed now, and I don't remember this before, I'm sure Raker will point out if I'm wrong, but you can now hold shift and it will give you the power data. Now, this works for power requirements on machines, and it also works for power output on engines as well. Now, I'm not sure if that was there before. I don't think it was, but it's definitely there now. So we've got the woodcutter. Now, the woodcutter requires a minimum power of 16 kilowatts. Well, that's fine because our steam engine outputs 16 kilowatts. But the woodcutter requires twice the amount of torque, 64 newton meters as opposed to 32 newton meters. Now, it doesn't say that it requires a maximum speed. Obviously, I'm assuming that more speed will make it work more quickly. But obviously, our steam engine doesn't provide enough torque. It's only half the amount. Now, this leaves us with three possible solutions. Two of them are quite easy, one's more complex, and you know me, I like to go for the complex solution. One solution would be to have two steam engines connected using a shaft junction, which would basically just double up the torque and then go into the one woodcutter, which is a possibility. It's an option. The second option is to have one steam engine and have it running into a 2-to-1 ratio gearbox, so we'd half the speed but double the torque is another option. Now, the other option that I've been given is to have a single steam engine going into an industrial coil, which from what I understand just works like a big battery. It stores up energy given to it from the engine until it's released with a redstone pulse. So essentially what you have is it doesn't output power continuously, but it stores it up until you reach a certain point and then you output it. And then to have a golden flywheel to actually keep the thing spinning so that once energy starts going into it, it stays up and running. That is what I'm going to have a go at putting together today. That is what my sort of mission is. Now, the first thing I'm going to need, which isn't Rotarycraft, is I'm going to need a timer. Now, I'm not actually going to build one of these because they're very similar to the timers that used to work in the Red Power 2 mod. These are obviously now from Project Red. Now, to make these, it's mainly about just cooking up some stone to make circuit plates and just basically mixing them in various combinations with bits of stone and redstone torches to make the various different parts needed to make the timer. So I'm just literally going to spawn the timer in just for ease of use. One thing I have noticed since the update is the icon for the liquid pipe in Rotary Craft has disappeared. Now, obviously, I'm using the Sphax texture pack, so it's quite possible that it is just a bug with the texture pack I'm using and nothing to do with the mod itself, which is most likely. Even though I don't think I've actually got textures for Rotary Craft on anyway, so I'm not too sure what's causing that. It's probably just an ID mismatch between texture pack and the current version of the mod pack. As you can see, the liquid pipes appear in the world and work as they should do, but for some reason they just disappear from the from the inventory, which is a little bit strange. So we've got our timer, we've already got our woodcutter, so the main things that I'm going to need is the industrial coil and the golden flywheel. Now, obviously flywheels have different limits to the amount of torque and speed that they can handle. So it's been recommended to me for the golden flywheel, so that's probably what I will go for. Can't see one there, so maybe it's just down as gold flywheel. Yeah, there we go. So gold flywheel core, and there's a gold flywheel. So how do we make a gold flywheel? Let's have a look at that. Obviously we need a gold flywheel core. We have a mount. We know how to make mounts. We've made many of those before. Flywheel cores is made with a steel gear surrounded by gold ingots. Well, that seems easy enough. I think I do have steel gears. Now, is that a component? Is that made in the crafting table? I guess this would have told me. Yeah, it's in a normal crafting table. We can see by the background. Obviously, the flywheel itself is made in the work table, and the core is made in the crafting table. So go to the crafting table, we'll put a gear in the middle and surround that with gold ingots. And there we go, we have our golden wheel core. Now, I don't think we actually have any mounts. I think, if I remember correctly, it's just 3 plates across the bottom, and then... Nope. I was about to get it wrong, wasn't I? How do we make the mounts? I've forgotten. Let's have a look there. Oh, it's a single plate. There we go, that's why. Don't need those. There we go. So we have ourselves a mount, and then we just go over to the work table and put those two together. That gives us our flywheel, and obviously shift for load data. So you can see that it has a required torque of 4,000 Newton meters. So I'm not sure if we're going to be able to output that torque from a single engine. And a max torque of 16,000 Newton meters. And a max speed of 1,410 rads, which I don't think we are going to exceed. I'm going to get rid of that steam engine because I already have one in place for where I had this thing in mind. But the other thing is the... what was it now? I've forgotten. Industrial coil. There we go. Right. Okay, so that one's just a stored... one that's already got the energy in it. So it's this one here. And wow, this has quite a few bits and pieces. Well, we can make mounts easy enough. We've got shaft units. Now we need a brake disc and a tension coil. Now the brake disc is made with gears and stuff, so we'll do that in a second. The tension coil is made with a lot of springs and another shaft unit. So we're going to need 8 springs and a shaft unit. Now I know I've got 1 shaft unit, but I'm already running low, so let's make some more. So there's some more shaft units. We need to make 8 springs. Now that gives us 4. And that should give us another 4. So we should now have 8 springs, which annoyingly enough don't stack. This is the thing that I find really... and sometimes they do. I find this weird with the springs. Sometimes they want to stack, and sometimes they don't. So, Raker, if you can explain that one to me, I would be very, very grateful. But let's put that together, which I think should just be in a normal crafting table with a shaft unit in the middle. There we go. We've got our tension coil. Now, we also need to make... how have I lost it already? There we go. We need to make the brake disc. Now, we've got 2 shaft units. That's easy enough. We've got a gear. We need a shaft bearing, which is made with some ball bearings and a steel ingot. Well, I think to get ball bearings, you just put 1 steel ingot in the work table. I have seen these before. Okay, no, obviously I'm wrong. I know I've seen bearings before, I just can't remember how to get them. Let's have a quick look at that. Oh, so you actually need 2 steel ingots now. I honestly thought it was just a single one. Maybe that has been changed, or maybe I was just misreading it before. So 2 steel ingots, there we go. That will give us 8 bearings. We also know that we are going to need another mount, so let's do that. 8 bearings and a gear. Again, it's probably going to be in the crafting table because this is just a component. It's not the finished output. Nope. Obviously, I've done something wrong here, as usual. Not an awful lot of change there. Steel ingot in the middle, surrounded by ball bearings. Oh, it's an ingot in the middle. That's where I went wrong. Okay. There we go. So that's the shaft bearing. Now we're nearly complete with this now. What we need is... we've got the gear, we've got the shaft bearing, we've got 2 shaft units, we need a 2 times gear, which is 2 more shaft units and 2 more gears. Of course it is. So we've got the spare shaft units, we do need 2 more gears, which are made like this. There we go. So that's that and that, and did I pick that up? No, there and there. That gives us our gears, and then obviously this is a component. That goes in the middle. No, it doesn't. It goes at the top. I've forgotten already. I'm terrible with recipes sometimes. So bearing in the middle, gear at the bottom. Bearing in the middle, gear at the bottom, and a shaft either side. And we are short on shafts. I thought we had enough. Obviously we do not. One of those things you always run out of. Okay. Now, I noticed some people were saying, I was actually having a look on the website for Rotary Craft, and there were a few people complaining about the amount of iron that is required to be able to make everything within Rotary Craft. And it is quite a bit. You do need a lot of iron, but I mean, there are several ways of getting iron, particularly when it's part of a mod pack such as this, when you've got crops and you can essentially grow iron should you need to. But the good thing is, it's, you know, it challenges you to build things as economically as possible and not just have 1,000 engines just because you've got an infinite supply of iron. So there is a real reason to doing it that way. So let us put this thing together now. So we've got another shaft and the brake disc goes on the left. So in the work table, mount goes at the bottom, shaft goes on the far right hand side, brake disc goes on the far left with the tension coil in the middle, and that gives us our industrial coil. So we've got everything that we need there, and probably a lot of stuff that we don't. Let's just have a look in our inventory. No information about the industrial coil, so let us go and see how this works. Now I've got a little place already set up, a little bit further afield. I do see the creeper ahead of me. Pow! He's dead. And some free gunpowder. Gotta love the gravel gun. Absolutely amazing tool. Absolutely amazing. So I decided that I was going to build this thing over here out of the way, just so there's less engine noise, and I was looking for somewhere a little bit flatter. So what I've got here, let's just get rid of that. What I've got here, a DC electric engine powering the pump to the steam engine, and the reason I decided to do that is I wanted to take the full power from the steam engine and use it for this setup. I didn't want to necessarily have to worry about doing it all off the same engine, and I've built it a little bit further away just so it's a bit quieter. So here is the tree we're going to be working on. So the first thing we are going to be doing is putting down our woodcutter. Obviously it needs to be facing the tree with the power input to the rear. I may need a shaft or two just to get this working. Obviously we've got our steam engine here, there's no problem there. We have our clutch which we can use to turn the system on and off. The first thing that I am going to bring in actually is a shaft unit or two. I didn't actually bring any with me, but that's not a problem. Again, steel shaft should be enough, but I guess if it's not, we will find out. So let's turn that the right way around. So the first thing that we want to put in is our industrial coil. So let's drop that down. Obviously the green's the input, so that needs to go that way. Now, I'm going to put the timer down first, so just so it doesn't build up too much power, because I'm assuming if I let it build up too much power without releasing, it's probably going to explode. Now, it's definitely outputting in the right direction. We need to have it on 1 second. And it's now outputting to 1 second. So what we're going to do here is we're going to turn on the power. Now it does have an input speed and an output speed. But nothing seems to be happening at the moment. Okay, we do have it facing the right direction, don't we? Yes, we do. Perhaps we just don't have enough power going into it. So let's just have a quick look and see what it says. So, the output torque and speed can be chosen at will. It can be used to store the energy for later or as a sort of a capacitor. To store low power LNG accumulated over a long time and then release it in one powerful burst. Which is exactly what we're looking for. We've got an engine that doesn't output enough torque. We want to be able to build up enough power within the industrial coil and then release it all so that we can fire it off in a burst. Maybe it doesn't need the redstone signal anymore now. Maybe we can just output... Right, maybe this is a change that's been made. So there's a possibility. Let me just remove this for now. Maybe it actually doesn't require a timer, because I do have a feeling that when I read the description for this before, it did say that it needed a pulse, and I don't think it actually does now. It seems to be built in, which is brilliant. So output torque. Well, the output torque we need is 64 Newton meters. We're not particularly bothered about the... We're not particularly bothered about the speed. Now let's see if this is going to work. I suppose we need to tell it what speed we want it to work at, don't we? So let's say we want it to output at 128 rads, just so we've got something in there. Okay, doesn't seem to be doing anything. Okay, it is storing energy, so maybe it does need a timer. I'm completely just guessing here. Let's just put this back to 1 second. Oh, something happened. I saw it move. Okay, so it is actually working now, and it is working on the timer. Okay, so it is outputting. Now, what we're going to need going into that is the flywheel, because even though this is outputting, right? Do we need to? Right, okay. What speed does this engine run at? Let's say if we put it up to 512 rads, will that work? Now, even though this is potentially outputting at 64 Newton meters, that's the gravel gun, not the transducer. Even though this is potentially outputting at 64 Newton meters, it's probably not going to be enough to get this spinning. So let's put the flywheel in place and obviously turn it around to face the right direction. Now, the flywheel has a certain requirement. So the flywheel is not rotating at any particular rads. It is receiving power, I think. If we turn the engine on, it might help. Although it almost looks like this is turning... Well, it would be turning in the opposite direction, wouldn't it? Because it's a coil, so that makes a lot of sense. So, looking at the flywheel again, let's just look up its entry in the book, actually. And it's going to be somewhere in here. Let's make sure we get this right. Okay, there we go. Flywheel. Obviously, various different ones. Okay, can't see the entry for it anymore, telling me what it actually requires. Or telling me what this requires. It's getting confusing now. So we know the woodcutter requires 64 Newton meters of torque. What we could do, I suppose, and I'm just going to do this as a little test. I'm just going to remove that flywheel just for a second. And I'm just going to spawn myself in a spare shaft. Just to put it to daylight as well, just to make sure we don't get blown up by any creepers that decide to come up behind us. And let's just pop those in, turn them the correct way around. Okay, so that's definitely working. And as you can see, it's getting insufficient power and it's getting insufficient torque. So this isn't outputting the amount of torque that I want. It's definitely getting more and more stored energy. It only has 1.5 megajoules of power. Should be more than enough. So obviously something here in my setup is incorrect. Maybe if we output the amount of torque and increase that. Well, it's doing something, because I've just received some wood. So let us remove this shaft here. And let us replace that with the flywheel. Now maybe the flywheel needs a certain amount of speed. It isn't actually getting any at the moment, so let's see if we can increase the speed here. In fact, what I'm going to do, instead of just guessing at random numbers, let me just spawn in another gold flywheel. Because I'm almost certain. There we go. So required torque is 4,000 Newton meters. There we go. So that maybe is why it isn't working. It requires well, it's not even 4,000, is it? Don't just round numbers off, because that's not going to work. It's 4,096. So if we set this to output at 4,096 Newton meters. There we go. Now it's working. The flywheel is getting power. The woodcutter is getting power. So it's receiving sufficient power. Only at 36 rads though, so it's pretty slow, but it's getting enough. Now the stored energy is going down pretty quickly. So the engine isn't providing us with quite enough power here to be able to keep that coil charged. So can we reduce the number of rads down to 64? Let's give it some lower speed. Obviously working on multiples of 8 as usual. Still going down though. And obviously we only require... What have we got here? We only require... Oh, that's getting 87 rads. Oh, because obviously the flywheel is speeding up, which is making the whole thing faster. So, still going down in power. And this is, we're actually getting sawdust. So, let us go on to this again. Let us try 32 rads per second. Obviously, we don't need a lot of speed from the coil because the wood is the speed is actually working from the flywheel itself. So, let's have a look at this now. 727, 725. Yep, it's pretty much evening out now as we look. I mean, obviously, it's using some and it's losing some. I don't know if it's ever going to get to a maximum amount of energy where it will eventually just give up and explode. I suppose that is a possibility, but it doesn't say anywhere that it has a maximum power capacity. There are a few bits and pieces in here that are new that I have not seen before, so it was certainly worth updating. Obviously, as we come to look a bit more at rotary craft, which we will be doing in the future, we're not stopping with it here. We're just going to look at other bits and pieces as we go along. But we will certainly update the mod pack closer to the time when we come to experiment with it a little bit more, and then that way we'll definitely have the very latest version. Now, I'm just leaving this here because apparently, if it drops saplings on the ground, it is supposed to replant. Now, obviously, ideally, we're going to need to have an item vacuum here, and that item vacuum would allow us to suck up all of the stuff that's on the ground. I'm just going to pick it up manually for now. I mean, this thing isn't really going to be serving that much of a purpose to me. It is working quite slowly, but as you can see, there we go, it has actually planted a sapling as well. So let's just pick up all of the stuff it has dropped. So now that we've got it up and running, let's basically try our best to explain the way that it's working. So we've got a steam engine that is outputting... Oh, I see the temperature's even shown now on the on the little pop-up at the top. That's a really nice addition. So we've got a steam engine that is outputting 16 kilowatts of power, and it's outputting that at, we'll try to remember my numbers now, 32 newton meters of torque at 512 rads. Now what we're doing with that power, because we need more torque for the woodcutter, we're putting that power into a industrial coil. And what that coil is doing, it's basically a big spring. It's storing the energy from the engine, and then it is releasing that energy at a set interval using the redstone here. Now what it might be is you don't normally need to use a flywheel. You could essentially just have a constant redstone signal. I'm guessing that's the way that these coils are actually supposed to work. You wouldn't normally have a flywheel. You'd just have a redstone torch or a lever. And providing that lever's turned on, the coil will basically just store up as much power as it gets and release it when it gets to that certain amount of power. Now, because we need a certain amount of speed for this thing to run properly, we've actually got it going into a flywheel. Now what's happening here is the power that's coming from the industrial coil, although it's intermittent, is actually keeping the flywheel spinning, and the flywheel is then providing constant power and constant speed to the woodcutter. Either way, it certainly works, and it does prove the flywheel rotating at 32 rads per second. We are still gaining energy here. I mean, we could potentially speed it up a little bit, but this proves that the entire setup is working. I'm going to turn the engine up. Well, the engine is staying on. Now, obviously, what is going to happen here is that this thing is going to continue to tick down, and the reason for that is because it still has stored power and the timer is still going. But that's fine. We'll leave that to do its thing until it runs out of power. But that may not be the most optimal way of doing it, but remember, I'm not doing this for optimal. I'm doing this to discover what things are for and how they work. And that does show that that is a valid method of increasing the torque that you get from an engine by using an industrial coil and a flywheel. Obviously, as I said, we could have done it just by using two steam engines and feeding them straight into the cutter using a shaft junction. And we could have also done it with a single steam engine using a gearbox. Obviously, the downside with the gearbox method means you've got to supply it with lubrication, which means you've got to have more canola seed production. It's not particularly efficient at the moment, at least it doesn't seem to be. A single steam engine powering a grinder can provide enough canola oil to lubricate maybe 2 or 3 gearboxes, so it seems. Haven't done the exact maths, but I try and avoid using gearboxes wherever possible because you need to supply them with a constant resource to get things to work. This setup here is self-sufficient. The only thing it needs is water, which it gets from an infinite water source, so it is a self-sufficient setup. Obviously, the 2-engine method would be less complicated and would work just as well. As you can see now, we have now used up all of the remaining stored energy that was in the coil, which is fine, but the wheel is still going. It will start to slow down now because it's not actually receiving any power. But that actually works. I wonder what happens if you... Yeah, you do take damage. I did wonder. I know if you stand on the grinder it hurts, but yeah, if you walk into a log cutter, it hurts. So at least we know. So there we go. There is another machine and another couple of power entity options from Rotary Craft. And I have to say... hats off to Raker. I actually really like the mod. I've always liked the sort of industrial type mods. There's a skeleton over there looking at me. What are you doing? Can't see him. I've always liked the industrial type mods. I loved Industrial Craft. I loved Build Craft. They were my favourite mods. I love being able to build machines. I love being able to connect machines together. And... ooh, a hole. This is where I used to have the most fun with things like Tech-It and Feed the Beast Ultimate and things like that. It wasn't just building buildings, it was building factories, it was building machines, it was building production lines, and not building them to be efficient or work well, it was just building them to have as much stuff connected to each other as possible, and that is definitely a great way of doing that. Obviously I could compact this a little bit down, we could get rid of the clutch if we didn't need it, get rid of a couple of these shafts as well, but you know, that's a lot of setup and a lot of materials just for cutting down a single tree, especially as it takes a while for that tree to go. Obviously, we could use something like the fertilizer. There's an actual fertilizer thing which you can use, which is part of Rotary Craft, which will make trees and crops grow quicker. So we could do that, and what we could do is we could just bone meal this up if we wanted to, and it would instantly regrow. But it doesn't seem like the most efficient way of gathering wood. It's not like something like a forestry multi-farm where you can actually have an entire orchard of trees that you can just cut down whenever you need them. But I quite like that setup. So I'm still going to keep flicking through Rotary Craft and having a look what's available, and if I see anything else that I think is quite exciting, because I certainly want to come back and have a look at a few more of the weapons, both the defensive and offensive ones. But I also want to have a look at the magic mods that are within this mod pack as well, because this is supposed to be a series on the mod pack, not just on a single mod, as brilliant as Rotary Craft is. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. I hope you've learned a little bit from this video. I know I certainly have, and I am quite impressed with that setup. So I'll see you guys next time, and until then, goodbye for now.